Welcome to Compound Insights, a podcast by CFA Society New York. I'm your host, Rob Rowan. Today we're talking about an investments topic that is kind of slightly off the run. We're talking about the continuing education business sector with Ian Schnorr, and we're going to get some critical notes from him at the end about financial model errors, which he is an expert in. But I also want you to hear about his experience in the sector because it might help you as you guide your clients. Ian is the executive director of the Financial Modeling Institute. He is also a content creator for CFA Institute, and he created the Financial Modeling Practical Skills module for Level 1, which some of you might be familiar with. You can see it on CFA Institute's website. Some of you may have taken it. He is a lecturer at Queen's University in Toronto, and before this, he worked for Citi and BMO. He got his degree at the University of Manitoba and is a CFA charter holder. So, welcome to the podcast, Ian.
Thank you, Rob. Real thrilled to be here.
Can you first talk about what Financial Modeling Institute is for the folks on the podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. And again, thrilled to be here. And we're thrilled to be in partnership. You already mentioned it with CFA Institute. I'm really excited that we were able to contribute the financial modeling practical skills module. Financial Modeling Institute is the world's only financial modeling organization. And I know it sounds bold to say that we are out to try to build a CFA type. We are modeling in some ways after the CFA Institute, an accreditation body focused solely on financial modeling. And we've done that because people are really keen to both learn and then validate their financial modeling skills and get accredited. And we believe that we're onto something. I mean, I spent my career, we'll talk about it after, training. I spent a lot of time training people, but what we saw was a huge need for people to be able to validate. And recruiters, many recruiters, maybe a lot of people listening on this podcast, started about 10 years ago asking candidates if they had strong modeling skills. And it almost became a prerequisite for jobs. And we realized that there was a gap in the market. There was no way for anyone to actually physically prove through a rigorous proctored exam that they actually had the skills employers were looking for. And so we were really excited to do this and thrilled that organizations like CFA Institute, and by the way, and AICPA, the largest accounting body in the US, has also decided to partner with us because financial modeling is just as relevant for accountants as it is for finance professionals. So that's what we're building.
Right. Yeah. I mean, a lot of CFA charter holders might not realize how much an accounting job has changed over the last decade or so. It is definitely not just, all that tech stuff. Well, let's talk about your experiences with the firm you just sold, because I
Yeah.
think it does give us a really good example of the prime trend in the educational sector.
For sure. I mean, I started, as you mentioned, I started my career as an investment banker. I worked for 6 years for BMO Capital Markets and then for Citibank. And I was at the time in the late 90s and the early 2000s, all the banks trained their own people. And I was one of the guys that got tapped on the shoulder, and I was only working 100 hours a week. And they'd say, "Hey, the new guys are starting. You got to teach them." And I'm
Right.
okay. I don't know how I'm supposed to find time for that, but so I was always one of the bankers, the juniors that would teach all the new bankers that came in. And so when I left banking, I was just looking for a bit of a break. I needed a bit of a 6 or 12 month break and thought, listen, I can teach. I've been teaching internally at the banks. And anyway, as luck would have it, I was in the right place at the right time. And that's roughly when many banks, most banks were looking to outsource training and bring in training firms. I'm here in Toronto, Canada. So initially got connected with all the Canadian banks and pension funds in the early days, and then started working with a lot of US and global organizations as well. And so I did that for about 20 years. There's only 5 or 6 firms, and my firm was called the Marquee Group, and there was only 5 or 6 firms in the world doing this teaching, training for banks and bankers, investment banking groups, commercial banking groups, private equity groups, all sorts of groups, internally, equity research groups, and only 5 or 6 of us out there doing it. And in around 2021, there started to be some interesting consolidation, and a couple private equity firms acquired or made a major investment in 3 of the 5 or 6 global firms. And we said, oh, wait a second. We want to join this party as well, and managed to bolt on. And I was able to put the Marquee Group into the hands of one of the U.S. private equity firm that had acquired a couple of other training businesses. So it was exciting to do that.
Yeah, but this is an exceptionally interesting sort of trend in an industry that we've seen in lots of other ones too, right? So there was the outsourcing by the banks that made an opportunity for you to found your firm.
Right.
Then you grew it up over time. And then there was like a lot of easy money for private equity companies that made them look around at consolidation plays. And this is sort of a classic consolidation play, right? So it cuts some of the costs and allows them to occupy that sort of hockey stick that they like in their investments. Now, some other industries have experienced some of the changes that come with consolidation. So what do you think is going to happen in the next couple of years as a person who started, grew, and then sold a company in this sector? Where do you think the consolidation is going to lead to changes in the industry, and what do you think is going to happen basically?
Well, it's a fascinating question, and I can tell you I have great visibility backwards, as we all do. I know
Right.
exactly, and I can tell you that when we all started, and again, it's no secret, Marquee Group is now in the same organization and part of the same firm as Training the Street. This is a name that many of your listeners will be familiar with. And AMT, the same private equity firm, acquired Training the Street, and then AMT, which is in the US, but does most of their work in Asia and Europe, and then us, Marquee Group. And you're right. So they acquired three businesses to consolidate them, turn them into one much larger global firm. And presumably, listen, I'm not on the ground or involved in these discussions, but it was part of a financial transaction. And so likely they're looking to probably put into someone else's hands at some point. I say that only because that is the classic private equity model. But I have no insight or knowledge of what the plans are. But I can tell you what I do know is that all training businesses when were started roughly in early 2000 were very custom, very niche because it was a small number of people. And we all worked with bankers, and we worked with bankers closely and said, hey, what do you need and what can we teach and how can we tailor it for your specific audiences? And that's what we did. And around 10 years ago, all of us trainers discovered that suddenly there was a new type of professional that we worked with, and they were called learning people. All the banks started putting in place learning departments, and that was new. And suddenly that had to formalize and professionalize what we were doing, and it became more consistent. And I think with this approach, as now there has been consolidation, and the great part about consolidation is that some of these financial sponsors and investors are investing capital for more professionalization, more technology, more sales and marketing. And so I think that is great. It will allow for more consistency globally. Inevitably, my suspicion, my guess is that will likely come at the trade-off will be the same bespoke customization that happened to grow all these firms. It'd be really hard to have a training firm with 100 instructors globally, all of whom can teach any of the content, to then get into really tailored bespoke content. I'm not saying that none of them are going to do it. The firms will probably still continue to try. It'll probably just be harder, which will open the doors for smaller firms to come in and say, hey, I'm going to service a niche and fill a niche that's tough to be filled by one of the larger global players.
Right, because at the end of the day, banks and lots of investment management companies have local regulators, state regulators, provincial regulators if you're in Canada, or federal regulators or some international ones.
There's
So,
regulation. There's regulation. There's niche accounting issues, different sectors. If you happen to be focused on a particular sector, there are industry. So, at the Marquee Group, we always, of course, Canada is a hotbed of mining activity, and so we used to get asked, can we teach a mining modeling course? And I said, we do. It's called our basic financial modeling course. If you know how to build a model, you can customize it for a mining company. Or like my view is that if you have strong modeling skills, I mean, listen, I've personally built models for, I don't know, 100 companies in a dozen industries. And if you understand the discipline, you can apply it to a real estate business or a mining company or an oil and gas. But so we initially resisted. And then one day we said, fine, let's develop a mining modeling course. Let's teach financial modeling under the guise of a mining company. It'll be a mining company model, and we'll include some mining topics. Well, it exploded in popularity, and all these miners showed up and wanted to learn. And I'm like, well, it's the same course. I mean, it's basically the same thing, but we're teaching a little bit of mining content, but they loved it. And I'm just saying that, we were able to do that as firms grow and get more global. Is it possible to have a telecom mining course and a mining modeling course and a real estate? I don't know, maybe, but it might be a little tougher because then you need people that can teach all those things, and it's just might be harder to scale. But that's so there might be opportunity for others to come in and service pockets of subsectors where people have specific focuses on niche sectors or niche, accounting issues, et cetera.
Yeah, so, and this is the other thing I'm kind of interested in hearing what you say, because not only are you exceptionally familiar with how to grow one of these businesses from nothing on up to something you sell, but what do you think is next for financial modeling? Because that's another thing you're an expert in, right? So like, what do you think is coming in how people are doing this, what they're doing? Is it AI? What's next?
Well, that's a great question. Again, I feel like I was here from the beginning. I mean, I literally started working in banking in the late 90s. At that point, Excel was still relatively new. Most of your listeners won't even know the term WYSIWYG. You might remember that somewhere in the back of your mind. It was a it was a critical evolution in modeling because WYSIWYG, of course, meant what you see is what you get. And it was late 90s when in a spreadsheet you could actually what you could format it, you could make it look, sophisticated. You could change the way it looked and felt. Whereas previously spreadsheets, which had been around for a while, were just black and white grids.
Yeah, just a bunch of
And
numbers. Yeah, yeah.
right. And the advent of that allowed for some of the proliferation of ideas and thoughts in terms of how modeling works. But at the time in the late 90s and early 2000s, it really was the Wild West. People just picked up a spreadsheet and, did whatever they wanted. What I've seen over the last 20 years, and this is partly why, myself and a number of other former colleagues have gone out to build the Financial Modeling Institute, because what we're seeing, we're responding to a desire for organizations to de-risk their processes, to know that the people building models on their teams are professional financial modelers. Modeling is so much more, and we'll talk, I think, in this episode around modeling disasters or huge errors
Yeah,
that people get
yeah, we're
into.
gonna get there for
Yeah,
sure.
but
Yeah.
people were just, it always frustrated me. It always frustrated me that if you were in banking and you worked on a transaction, any sort of a deal, a financing deal or an M&A deal, you would always be surrounded by other professionals. There were always lawyers working on the deal and accountants, engineers. If it was an old economy business that had physical assets, you'd have engineers, you might have actuaries. All of
Mhm.
those people had university plus some independent accreditation to validate their skills. You don't want me drafting your purchase and sale agreements, because I've never gone to law school. I've never worked at a law firm. But the analogy of me, a finance guy, drafting the purchase and sale agreements, which is a horrible idea and it would be a disaster. That's about the same to me as I feel when I look at a lot of financial models that are built out there. It feels like they're built, and I know a lot of financial models are built by people that don't have the skills. They might be a history major or someone who's worked in banking for a few months and gets asked, so it always frustrated me that the banker, the person building the model, was the only person on that team that didn't need to have the same level of professional accreditation to do their job. And it's often the central tenet of any transaction is the model. And so many models have failed and will fail because of you don't want me building a bridge either, going over over a river, because it will collapse. By the same token, we want to make sure people building models know what they're doing, really know what they're doing, and are accredited to do so that the model doesn't collapse.
Okay, so let's get on to that last thing that you referenced earlier. What are some of the most common errors that you see in financial models now?
Sure. And I'll touch on a couple and then I'll rattle off a few because I think that some of the listeners here will be able to relate to some of this. And, it's funny. I just came back from a conference in London on the future of Excel and the future of using data. It's evolved tremendously. The global head of financial modeling from PwC, he's based in Australia, was there, and he delivered a talk. And it was fascinating because a lot of things he's talked about are things I've talked about on this side of the world. He refers to himself as a professional financial modeler, and he talks about some of the critical things required to build a model, the process involved in modeling, the scoping, the planning, the designing, the building, the reviewing. It's the handing it over, the updating. This is all needs to be properly documented, and it's a regimented process. Most people don't do that. And so because people don't go through rigorous processes, many financial models are a mess. A good financial model I have said this a million times, has to be a powerful communication tool. It's got to be a beautiful tool that can be used to help inform and make optimal financial decisions. And yet most financial models fail because people haven't gone through a proper process and they don't know some of the critical skills. So what do I see? Well, I can tell when models are a mess that they have not been well planned. It literally was like building a 20-story building with no architectural blueprint. it's not going to work very well. So what are some things that we see? Well, giant formulas. You probably can relate to this. Have you ever clicked on a cell, Rob, and you saw a formula that linked to 19 cells in 20 sheets? And you thought, oh my gosh, that's like the Christmas lights in my house that just got thrown into a box, and I can't follow how the wiring works. It's a disaster. A formula never needs to be built that way, but people do. So we use a technique, and this is any of our learners, anyone that comes into any candidates that join the FMI get access to learning materials. But the key thing and those learning materials are what's part of the CFA program. Just to be clear, CFA candidates are not writing a modeling exam. They're just seeing the learning materials. But our candidates through the AFM program get the learning materials, and then they have the ability to sit a challenging exam, which forces them to practice and then prove that they've got skills. So they will never build formulas with huge, giant, crazy long formulas linking to 19 cells. They know it's a disaster. It's impossible to read. It's impossible to audit. It's filled with
Yeah.
mistakes.
Or tell somebody else how you do it. Yeah. It's like,
I
yeah.
can't transfer that model to you. You'll never
Right.
understand it.
Right.
Another one, you've ever seen this? Too many sheets. Have you ever opened an Excel spreadsheet and it's like, oh my gosh, there's 45 sheets. It goes forever. Of course, that means that formulas are interlinked and interconnected. A disaster. The worst one I ever saw was a client that called us years ago at the training firm at Marquee Group, and they said, help. They had a model. It had 113 sheets, and we thought, my God, this is a disaster. It was built on 100. Just imagine the formula logic. It was horrible. So they hired us to rebuild it and clean it up, which we did. But there's a lot of other things, and if you're curious, I can talk about them. Things like external links to other files are a disaster. There's a right.
Okay,
You've seen
yeah, those are getting much rarer because of the prohibitions by some regulators.
Yeah, and
Right,
that's helpful.
that's getting a lot harder to do.
People still do it. I mean, Excel allows it, so people do it, but dangerous. There are certain family of functions and tools in Excel that are very dangerous. Again, this other Ian, who was the head of financial modeling at PwC, who I mentioned, at PwC, they have a whole list of danger zone. They call them evil functions. And but there are tools. Just because Excel has it, there are some very specific tools that you want to avoid. Other critical errors. Column periodicity. Periodicity is the column structure and the way you design it. And you need to make sure that when you build formulas, you can copy them to the right. Well, very often people will have columns where the formula is not consistent between one column and the next, which of course leads to disasters. Column alignment, columns not being aligned, plugs on balance sheets where people can't get the darn balance sheet balance. And so they just put in a back solve. I've actually been putting up a series on my LinkedIn page to talk about the top 10 reasons why people's balance sheets don't balance. But there's a lot of reasons people fall into a long. Have you ever seen huge nested if statements? An if within an if within an if within an if? I
Yeah,
mean,
I don't even like this in Python. That's just, yeah,
it's
they don't even make sense in Python, much less Excel. Yeah.
exactly. And so there's just no end of errors and issues that we see on people's models that leads to people not being able to use them well, not being able to confidently make optimal decisions, not being able to share them well and communicate off them to their teams, their bosses, their clients, and regrettably inappropriate decisions at times. And we're hoping that, and we expect to be part of a wave, a movement that's professionalizing the discipline of modeling, where people say, no, I want to use best practices around the planning, the design, the structuring. I want to be the expert in the room so that when a lawyer speaks confidently about legal issues, everyone listens. And when the professional modeler speaks about modeling issues, everyone listens. And that's kind of what we're helping to build through this accreditation process and having a lot of fun with people. And again, it's a huge thrill to be working with you and with the CFA Institute, as the CFA recognizes the importance of modeling as well.
Yeah. I mean, this is one of the things that's been very obvious to me is you've really carved a nice spot within the CFA Institute, which is not easy, as the sentence I just said. But do everyone who's listening to this podcast know if you are a CFA charter holder and you're a member of CFA Institute, you can see a lot of the credential of the materials rather that Ian has created on CFA Institute's website. So if you don't remember them and you want to look fondly back on level one, please by all means do that. While we're here, I also should tell you that as you've reached nearly the end of this podcast, you are also entitled to 1/4 of one CFA Institute professional learning credit. So feel free to document that
I'm going
on
to
your
document it on my sheet as well.
you get
Does
one too.
it count for me?
Sure. Yeah, so, as far as
Wow.
I know, I've mentioned before that CFA New York is a different company, but in all seriousness, the CFA charter holders, professional learning credits are coming. Get started now. It's going to be a lot easier if you do that now. But thank you, Ian, for being on the podcast.
Always a thrill and a pleasure to speak with you, Rob. And I look forward to more. And if you want to, if people are curious about some of these issues, I'm certainly happy to chat more about what we're doing. But thank you for having me. It's really enjoyed chatting with you today.
All right, and thank you all to listening. Until next time, this has been Compound Insights, and I will always be your host, Rob Rowan.